President Trump and his Republican allies are working overtime to defend the president against allegations regarding the impeachment inquiry, whether it's by rationalizing, deflecting, or dismissing. Many conservative TV and radio personalities are peddling debunked conspiracy theories, attempting to discredit the anonymous whistleblower, and dismissing the allegations as simply hearsay. That's despite the White House transcript notes that corroborate the complaint.
If you're going to prove that the president is using leverage to get a Ukrainian leader to do what he wants to do to help himself politically, why would it go so down in the conversation before he even brought up the name Biden?
This impeachment coup attempt by the Democrats is going to unify Trump voters like nothing before. And in 2020, Trump supporters will turn out at the polls in numbers you won't believe.
Everything that this whistleblower said was going to be in that report was already out in the press or has been disproven.
Well, joining me now, MSNBC contributor, editor-in-chief of The Bulwark, and somebody who was a talk radio guy himself for a while, Charlie Sykes. Do you view that as a moniker, talk radio guy, a positive, a negative? What do you make of it these days?
At this point, I prefer former talk radio guy.
Former talk radio guy. Well, what's interesting here is watching sort of absurd ideas, something that actually does not meet the smell test, get said as if it's so logical. The first one was Kilmeade, where he says, well, if he was trying to do leverage, why would he wait so long before he brought up Biden? And I'm thinking, actually, that's called anytime you deal with somebody and you're trying to ask a favor that you know is kind of difficult, you don't lead with it, you sugarcoat it for a while, and then you get to the... I mean, it's amazing to me. That's just one example here. Something that actually is the opposite of common sense. Anyway, where are we headed?
Well, we're headed for a lot more of all of this. I mean, we've seen the creation of these alternative reality silos in the last several years, and now they are really fully operational. So you're seeing this weaponized BS in a world where it doesn't really matter whether something is true or not. All that matters is that it adds to the narrative, that it's plausible enough that somebody in the base can grab onto it to reinforce their support for Donald Trump. This is what Garry Kasparov, the former world chess champion, Russian dissident, once described as the annihilation of truth. The point isn't really to convince you that one thing is true or false. It's to make you doubt your critical sensibilities. What do you believe? What is true? And that's why this fog machine is often so effective. The question is whether or not it's going to it reaches a big enough base to actually save Donald Trump.
And here's what I think some of us struggle to understand the lack of logic that dictates the talking points in the echo chamber. And that is this. So, for instance, the behavior of Mr. Barr, at basically deciding to, it looks like, be the president's personal attorney at times, which is exactly what the right believed Eric Holder was doing for Barack Obama without evidence. But now it's almost as if there's a rationalization. Well, Obama did it, or at least we thought Obama did it and Holder did it, so it's okay if our guy does it, right? Is that what's happening?
That is exactly right. And this is something that you see from Trump all the time, which is projection. When you start from the premise that the other side is capable of doing anything. They lied, they cheated. Therefore, why shouldn't we play by the same rules? Now, the other part of all of this, I was thinking about this when I was coming down here today, Donald Trump's superpower is his complete shamelessness. And what you're seeing, though, among the people who are surrounding him is that it's become, it's leaching out to them, the sense that they are not embarrassed to be peddling lines that are debunked over the next couple of days. And that's really been what's happening. What you've seen is that a lot of the Trump defense lines fell apart very, very quickly, but that doesn't seem to cause anyone to take any pause to say maybe we shouldn't be doing all of this, or maybe we ought to, modify our support. This is all incredibly tribal. Right.
Not only that, it seems to look. I've noticed in the conversation I had with a few Republican, they sit there. Whoa! I'm not here to defend Rudy Giuliani. Then they go on and they're not defending the president's behavior. They instead say, well, what about Adam Schiff? Or what about the Democrats? This shouldn't be throwing him out of office material, whatever it is. How long can that deflection go on?
It'll go along as long as it's necessary to go on. I mean, the power of whataboutism has become, I think, pretty obvious. And so this is, of course, is the go-to, is that if Trump does something that is absolutely indefensible, you don't defend it. You find something else. You find something that Adam Schiff said. You find something that Maxine Waters said. And this is why Democrats need to be so disciplined, because all it takes is just a couple of data points. People who go too far, say something extreme, and that becomes the YouTube moment. That becomes the soundbite. And this feeds into this. And it's beyond an echo chamber at this point. It really is an alternative reality silo.
Right.
Where over the next several months, there will be a completely different story. The facts will be different. The characters will be different. And this is the reality that we live in. And no matter what comes out about Donald Trump, there will be people who will believe that narrative.
What I'm trying to figure out is who feeds who here. Like Donald Trump and this bizarre Ukrainian CrowdStrike server conspiracy that is, it's so wild. It's been debunked, but it's been debunked because there's like nothing to debunk. It's so bizarre. Is he just is he consuming this, or does he have people feeding it to people so that he can consume it?
No, it is a bizarre feedback loop at this point, where you have these conspiracy theories that at one time were in the corner of the fever swamp. I mean, they might have been on some websites, but I think most, even most talk show hosts probably would have dealt with them with a lot of caution. But now you have the president who is feeding directly, and he puts that into the bloodstream. And once he says something, then you have the obligation of the rest of the conservative media to say, well, maybe there's something to it, or go back to what we were just talking about, the whataboutism, or the anti-Trumpism, which is also a powerful weapon, which is you don't defend Trump, you just attack anyone who attacks Trump.
And Seb Gorka being brought along as a member of the press somehow on Mike Pompeo's trip there. I mean, look, anybody can call themselves a member of the press. I get that, but that in itself seems like you're bringing a conspiracy theorist on board a plane with you.
Well, it is bringing a conspiracy theorist on board the plane with you. And this is, leaving aside the more serious allegations against the president, his misuse, his abuse of power, his shaking down a foreign country. The fact that in the president's mind, these conspiracy theories have taken root, that this is a man whose judgment has tremendous influence on all of our future, and yet he doesn't have the judgment to recognize how crazy some of these theories are, how baseless they are, and he won't listen to people who tell him that, and that in itself is scary.
Right. Folks need to realize the same person that believes these conspiracy theories has got to make the decision whether to trust Kim Jong-un. Charlie Sykes, thank you very much. Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Beat the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.